Greetings, everyone. I am Yesenia Guadalupe. This is Friday Fat Chats, powered by Fat Women of Color. This is a series that amplifies the voices of Black and Brown women of size. We feature guests from our community to talk about topics that affect and are important to us. And today we are very lucky to have our featured guest, Dr. Bianca Laureano, a sexologist, to wrap up our talk on the power of pleasure. So she will be joining us shortly. There we go.
Hi.
Hey, Bianca, how are you?
Hi, Yesenia. I'm so happy to be here. It's my favorite part of my day today.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So can you introduce yourself for the folks? Tell them a little bit about your work, who you are.
Sure. So as Yesenia shared, my name is Bianca Laureano, and I am a sexologist in the United States. I am a Black Puerto Rican. I'm disabled. I'm fat. I am a femme. I'm queer. And I'm in a relationship. I'm polyamorous, kinky, so a lot of different identities that I bring with me to this conversation today. And a lot of my work has been in training people who are sexuality professionals, and as well as training people who want to come into the sexuality field. I also create curriculum, and I do classes, and I teach. So I have a range of experiences working with people, but really where I shine is in training and curriculum development and teaching. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to wrap up this conversation around pleasure.
Yes.
For people.
So I heard you describe yourself just now, right? As a fat femme, was it? Mm-hmm. As a fat femme. So in terms of fat women of color, right? We always love to know when you kind of claimed that identity. So in terms of identifying as fat, identifying as a woman of color, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in being empowered in that identity, claiming that identity, and all the other identities that you described too?
Absolutely. So I'm one of those fat femmes who has always been fat. You know, and I look at pictures of myself as a child, and then as a teenager, like I've always been large bodied, and also fat and soft and round. And so, you know, when I was 14 years old, I was wearing like a size 14, 16. So I've always been taller. I was 5'8" when I was 14. I'm now 6 feet tall without shoes. And that's not counting the hair. So I always look, 6'2". So it was really like coming into my body and understanding the power that came with it, being seen at 14 years old as like a full grown woman, but also hypersexualized because of the way that I looked, and also because of how sexual violence works. And so that experience definitely informed my sexual awakening and understanding sexual power. And I grew up with a mom who was very much a femme and very much, wore red lipstick for everything. It's very much a cultural artifact in our home. And the way that I was introduced to makeup was something that was really always connected in our home. My father's an artist. And so we were always around artwork and paint and acrylics, and, things were always on the wall, and we were always encouraged to express ourselves. And my mom was the type of mom where when she would get cosmetics, she would always get those little extra gifts that had additional little, types of makeup. And I would always get those, I would always get that. So I was that like 10-year-old kid that was using like Estee Lauder mascara. And like putting on like this, colored lipstick. And my mom was like, yeah, have fun with it. And so I started to understand makeup as not just part of like a feminine identity, but also about a powerful identity, and also a way for me to create messages about who I am, how I want to move in the world, how I want to be received, and also controlling the way that I looked. So very much was connected to body autonomy for me as a young femme growing up. And then my queerness was really always present. I think queering, the fact that like I'm big and I'm tall and I'm brown, I got bushy hair, and people were like, what are you? What are you mixed with? I got a lot of that in the 90s, in the 2000s. And, my family's from Puerto Rico. I'm a Black Puerto Rican, and I'm very light skinned. And so I'm one of those people that, in the winter, this is like my winter skin tone. So in the summer, I go a little darker. My freckles come out a little bit more profoundly. But so the racial journey was also really impactful for me because people in my immediate family did not claim that Blackness. And so I was really raised in a very anti-Black home. And it was hard. And it still is hard to this day for my family, specifically my dad, to really acknowledge that, like, this is my life. I move in the world. I'm treated as, I am viewed as, I identify as, I am a Black Puerto Rican woman. And so it's been an area of contention in my family. But my sister's like, that's who she is. Like, why is it an issue? My sister and I are both queer. And so she's been married to a woman, she's raising children. And for me, I'm child-free by choice, and I don't want to have kids. And I'm very clear about that. So thank you to my sister for getting me off the hook, giving our parents grandchildren. And I'm partnered with a trans masculine person, and we are in a queer relationship. We are polyamorous. And, I wasn't always polyamorous. I definitely came into this idea of relationship anarchy from realizing that monogamy, it can be limitless in certain ways, but it also wasn't fully capturing the ways that I wanted to love people in radical, affirming ways. And so it's been a journey where, people think that they're polyamorous, but really they just want lovers. And that's fine. I really don't just want lovers. I also want, like, relationships with other people too. So I have a core partner who's my partner G, and then we also have other partners as we figure out what our lives are going to be like. That has been a little bit put on pause because of COVID and because the primary goals are not being ill. And so, as a disabled person, that was something that was new for me. I wasn't born disabled. So my disability was acquired about 4 years ago when I was told that I had inherited my mom's compromised immune system. And so COVID has really shifted things for me. And the reality is, if COVID is transmitted to me, I'll die, right? Not just because I have a compromised immune system, but because I'm fat. And we know how fat people are treated when they go to the doctor, especially the hospital and during a pandemic. So all of that has really impacted, our relationships, the way that we move in our, open relationship, but also our sexual experiences and communication and just the shifting relationships that we have with other people. A lot of it is in this way, virtually. So those are a little bit of the ways that I've been politicized, and also how I came into my fullness as a person. And a lot of the things, one of the big stereotypes that people always have of me is like, oh, Bianca, you're so young. You look so young. And I'm like, yes, my beige don't age. But also I've been fat my whole life. Like, and having this big, fat, beautiful face also means that I ain't got the wrinkles like other people. So like, really claiming and being open with people, like, I've always been fat, and that's why I also look younger, is one of those reminders of, loving being a large body person as well. It was one of the benefits.
That's so beautiful. Like, I love how all of your experiences have kind of brought you to this place where you're just like completely unapologetic and open about who you are in all these aspects. And even if it means that there's going to be some sort of like friction in your family, which is so difficult, at least in my experience as a Latina, like, that anything that goes against like the family, right, or that the family kind of like frowns upon, is so difficult to step into. I identify as a queer person as well, and I didn't come out to my parents until this year. I'm 33 years old, so it's one of those things where I think it's so beautiful that you talk about it in the way that you do, and so passionately, because it really, like, I think helps even me just listening to you now. Like, it makes me, it validates my existence, so I feel that love, and I appreciate you for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
What did your identity bring you into your work as a sexologist, or was it just kind of like all coming to a head? Like, how did you come into sexology as work?
Yeah, you know, in the 90s, so I was in high school in the 90s, and a lot of the conversations about Latinos were focused on Mexican American people and was really talking about, oh my gosh, Latinos are having so much sex and having so many babies. And that was just not my reality. And I was like, but I'm not having babies, so who are they talking to? And then realizing that, like, oh, other people in the community are, but like, this isn't just the one experience that all of us are having. And then I started to read more in the literature where people talked about, you know, machismo, which is just a Spanish way of saying misogyny. And so I realized that I was like, oh, that's not my reality in my family where my father is behaving in this particular way. But also when we asked Latino men, like, what do you think it means to be a man? They had different responses. And so, you know, reading about what other people thought about us was really jarring. And that was one of the ways where I just was like, people are making up stories and it's not inclusive of what my reality is. And so what does that mean for me and the work that I want to do? So I always came into this space where I was being told that I was already hypersexualized, that I was already going to have like 4 kids before I was 25, all these other things. And, you know, it was the work of like Gloria Anzaldúa and Sherry Moraga and, you know, other queer and lesbian identified people who were writing from a perspective of being a queer Latina living in the United States and what those shifts and changes were. And so even though I was exposed to their writing, which deeply had a Mexican American perspective and a mestizaje consciousness, as Gloria Anzaldúa offered, I was also reading the work and the poetry and art of Puerto Ricans in my family and also in the world. And then also having people like Celia Cruz being, you know, is someone in our life, La Lupe, right? Like just all the ways that, you know, Latinas were so sensual, especially Caribeñas and people in the Caribbean, like the way that we celebrate, the rituals that we create to really ground ourselves in our bodies and our minds and our spirits. Those were also always really connected to my understanding of the world. And so when I started to read more about what people were thinking about us, I was like, why aren't we talking about what we're really experiencing? And so that was really what led me into studying human sexuality. And it started off with, you know, public health. And I realized, oh, public health, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to talk to people about, you know, other issues. I really want to focus on sexuality. And for me as a Puerto Rican during that time, a lot of the conversation was about forced sterilization among Puerto Rican women in Puerto Rico, about the birth control pill trials. And I really wanted to have a more expansive conversation about what was going on. And so a lot of my training was by other Mexican and Puerto Rican women in a traditional way where I went to college. And for me, college was the way out of my family home, of the community that I just wasn't fully accepted in, and also for a different idea of independence that I really craved. And, you know, growing up as like a teenager in the 90s and watching like a different world, I was really, really ready to go and have some of those campus experiences. And so, you know, for me, college was a form of liberation for me at the time. And I did a really traditional way of going through college. So I did undergrad at the University of Maryland, College Park. Then I found a human sexuality program at New York University. And I went into that program immediately after graduating from University of Maryland. And I was there for 2 years. And it was a very white program. And a lot of human sexuality programs are very white. And when I say that, what I mean is I had no faculty members of color. So I went from having Black and Latina faculty members at the University of Maryland to being trained and taught exclusively by white men about human sexuality. And being in a space where I was the only person of color in the classroom. And so that was really, you know, a little shocking to like move to New York City and to be surrounded by people of color all the time, except for when I was in school, which was the only reason why I moved there. And so, you know, that's that was my experience. And unfortunately, that's still the experience for a lot of people of color who want to pursue sexuality careers, unfortunately. And then I went into a PhD program and did work there. And that was completely different because it was all women of color primarily. It was a women's studies program. I didn't complete that program, but I got a terminal master's degree, which means I got 2 masters. And then this year, I was awarded an honorary doctorate for my work in the US sexuality field, in advancing equity and justice frameworks in our field and really pushing the white supremacy that this field was built upon to reshift and reimagine what's possible when we bring more Black and Indigenous people of color into the space. So I've had a really full, over almost 25-year experience being in the field and doing a variety of different things, not just teaching in the classroom, but also creating curriculum, training people how to use that curriculum, training doctors and nurses and providers and therapists. And so now my work looks like continuing to do that work, but in a more focused way. So not just elevating the voices of Black and Indigenous people of color, but also using the power that I have in this field strategically to bring more people with me. So you just had my good dear friend, homegirl, and colleague, Goody Howard. She's a really great example of not just the homegirlship that I want to build with people in the field, but also the ways that I'm like, Goody has a gift and she can reach a community of people that I can't reach. So let's collaborate so that we are sharing some really dope information and meeting the needs of people in a variety of different ways. And so that's the kind of work that I really want to do is show up as the human being that I really want to be. And that looks like using my power really strategically that I've acquired, and also making it a little bit easier for people to come into this field and do the work that they want to do, because there's so many people who are interested in sexuality work, and there's room for everyone to do this work, and it doesn't need to be hard. You don't need to go the traditional college route that I went, and I really want to make new paths for people to come in and do this work for sure.
That's amazing. It sounds like, right, like your work is kind of like an all-encompassing thing, and you've drawn from the women that you've met in your life and that have influenced you, right? And that's kind of like pushed you into trying to get other people, right, to hear this message, because it's so important for like all of us, right? One of the things that you spoke about, that you touched upon, that I want you to go back to a little bit, is this sense of like ritual and like practice that exists in like the Caribbean, right? Which I think is such an important part of like the way that we express ourselves sexually, but it isn't really something that we hear a lot about. So can you talk a little bit more about that, rituals and practice?
Absolutely. So when I say rituals and practice, I think about the ways that we make space to practice whatever we need to practice. So for me, ritual looks like pulling from all of the ways that I've been taught in my family to voice or to communicate whatever I need. So sometimes it looks like moving my body and dancing. Sometimes it looks like humming. Sometimes it looks like drawing a picture. Sometimes it looks like building a quick little altar to a specific need that I have. So before I met my partner, I was living in New Orleans, and that's just such a magical place to be. And I remember having like 5 different altars to 6 different things. My mom had just died in Puerto Rico from Alzheimer's. And so, when you had talked about like finally coming out to your parents, Yesenia, I never came out to my mother because by the time I was ready to, she wouldn't have remembered it. Right. So thinking about like, what's the ritual? Like, what are the ways that I really need to connect to her now that she's forgetting so much and ultimately will forget who I am? And so those are some of the ways that I was like, how am I going to use language to connect us versus disconnect us? And that also being a form of ritual. So I had, an altar just to my sex life, where I was like, I need a lover. I need someone who's going to care for me. My sex needs to be amazing. And, I'm exiting my 30s because she died 4 years ago. And I was like, I really need a lover that is going to be serious about me and my body and my pleasure. And it's going to be, a commitment for both of us. And And, you know, I did sex magic, and I invited all my friends who were partnered already. I was like, listen, I want all y'all to start fucking at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday or whatever. And I'm going to start masturbating. I'm going to light these candles. And I just want to pull all the sexual energy that I can from all of the fucking that all of you agree to do. I mean, it wasn't.
That's amazing.
That was one of the ways that I was really practicing like sex magic in a really intentional way. And so I would do that. I would light candles because I believe that, you know, fire changes the air that we're in. I'm also a Leo, so I'm a fire sign. So I really appreciate fire and all that it can represent. And also just allowing like my tears to flow, and, you know, recognizing that like when I cry, that's sacred, my water's sacred. So building ritual looked just like my grief. It was a shapeshifter. You know, rituals really, for me, meant finding comfort in the body that I have, finding a grounding in what I wanted to experience. And sometimes the ritual was, let's go to Whole Foods and buy a chantilly cake. And if you'll know what the chantilly cake is, it's a very particular type of cake made in New Orleans. And I was like, and I'm gonna eat a slice while I sit here and light these candles at my sex altar. You know, and like it was a range of different experiences, but it all was grounded in my joy. And it was all deeply connected to reminding myself that, you know, my ancestors are here with me. They have my back. And also, you know, at this time, the language of epigenetics was really, really being explored more, where people were talking about historical trauma and intergenerational trauma and how trauma is passed down to various lineages. And for me, I was like, all right, I understand that trauma can be passed down, but I also believe that that pleasure can also be passed down. So I really wanted to be like, okay, what is the pleasure that my great great grandmother, who I never met, like, what were her orgasms like? When did she get pleasure? Was it when she was feeding her children? Was it when she was gardening? Was it when she, you know, put on like a new dress? And really wanting to pull from the pleasure that other people in my life, my ancestors, even those who were enslaved, how they found joy, how they found pleasure and resistance, and really pulling from those realities too. And what that forced me to do was sexualize them, and in a way that we often don't always allow of our ancestors, and recognizing that they too had bodies and minds, and they too had a different experience, but they also felt joy and pleasure. And so what are the ways that I can really bring that narrative and experience in to feel whole and comfortable? And so for me, that's what it looked like. And, you know, it was also a very collective experience. I invited other people to come in. And, you know, and it also looks like me, you know, when I'm bathing, I like look at my hands. I'm like, oh, I have the hands of my father, or oh, I have, you know, the freckles of my mom when I'm washing my face. And so really just reminding myself, it's sometimes just inner dialogue of how I got here, who I am. And even if those people don't want to claim their Blackness, I'm going to claim the Blackness that is in them that produced someone like me. And I'm not going to allow their resistance to erase that Blackness in my life and in my reality. So it's also really healing for me in a way that I wasn't always able to get in like a more Western approach to healing that we hear a lot about. So it's been a really beautiful way to reconnect with the life that I want to have and the ways that I've been raised, and connecting back to like this ancient wisdom and brilliance that I believe flows and that we've all inherited in a very intentional way.
Wow. I mean, that was a lot, right? A lot of information. I feel like the way that you use ritual and the intention, right, behind how you're using ritual is so powerful, even not just for like connecting with your own sensuality and love, right, but also with like grief, and having that be something that you can connect with when you're mourning somebody's passing and when you're thinking back about your ancestors. And I love the personification of it, right, too, where you're like, well, let me think of them as like fully human beings, because sometimes, right, with ancestors, we kind of think of them as this like mythological like lineage, but it's like, no, they were like full human beings and they experienced like a range of emotions, right? And so tapping into that, like, I think you said, what did my ancestors feel like, or what did their orgasms feel like? I want to tap into that. Like, wow. That's amazing. I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about ritual in that way. Like, I'm like,
It was a journey. Like, it's hard to, I was just in that space. Like, if anybody's ever lost a parent, especially the parent which was your first relationship on the planet, it really was this severing of something nobody could have told me to expect. And it really fucked me up. Like, and it still has in many ways. And so I was just, people use the language of like rock bottom. It wasn't rock bottom, but I really felt so stripped and vulnerable. And, my grief, I was alone for a lot of my grieving. I wasn't partnered. I was living alone. I was in a new city. And I just cried hysterically in public everywhere I went, Yesenia. I was like, oh, I'm in the Home Depot and they don't have the cardstock color I want. And here's a little girl with her mom. I'm holding her hand and just hysterically crying. And so just reminding myself that like my tears are sacred. The water I produce is sacred. My fluids are important. And it made some people uncomfortable. And I'm like, look, we're having a conversation and I might just start to hysterically cry and keep talking. I'm fine. It's just what my body needs to release. And that's the same kind of conversation I would have to have with new lovers, where, we have this language of enthusiastic consent, which I think is bullshit, because we all know how to perform enthusiasm. We all know how to like put a happy face on and be all enthusiastic. And for me, I was like, I'm too exhausted and I'm mourning. And I don't have the energy to put on that enthusiastic face. So I really had to sit with my potential lovers and be like, listen, when you're fucking me and I start to cry, continue to fuck me. Like, don't stop. Don't be like, are you okay? Like, I'm fine. It's just my body needing to move this through it. And it was intense. And a lot of people were like, are you sure? And I'm like, listen, I know that you've been taught that I should be super happy and jolly, and I am, that you're here. And it doesn't show up on my face because I'm still grieving, right? So it was really hard conversations, but it was also a reminder to me that we need to believe people when they say things, even if their bodies may be giving us different signals. If someone says to you, I'm happy that you're here, I'm going to cry and it's fine, continue to be here. Like, I want people to know that it's okay to believe people. And that's what it looks like to believe Black women, to trust Black women when we tell you things, but also to trust ourselves and to be really honest, because I wouldn't be able to have enjoyable sexual experiences if I wasn't honest and saying, my body feels really tense and I need to feel something other than grief and pain. So I need a lover to come in and remind me that my body can experience pleasure, and that's why you're here, and that's important to me. And it might not show up in this jolly yay afterglow. My afterglow might be like mascara running down my face, which I think is really sexy, but like that's what it look like. And I want you to know that's exactly what I want. And so it really made me a better communicator with what my needs were, for sure. And that was hard. That's like being an adult. Like, it was it wasn't always fun. But it also reminded me that there's plenty of people in the world who have disabilities, and maybe their affect is not to perform enthusiasm, and maybe they very much are like, yeah, I'm really enjoying this, even though my voice is in a monotone way, or maybe I don't have control over my facial muscles in the way that you want me to smile. Like, we can still experience pleasure and joy and ask for what we want, even if we're not performing enthusiasm in the way that we understand consent. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, to really expand our understanding of what consent can look like when it comes to sexual pleasure for people.
Yeah, I think like you said, expanding our expectations, right? Because there's like a framework for what we think sex is supposed to look like, what pleasure is supposed to look like, how we're supposed to grieve, what we are allowed to do, what we can't do, right? So like, giving ourselves permission for it to look however it looks for us, right? I think that it's so powerful that you shared that, that, you know, you can be in a moment of pleasure and still feel grief, and maybe that's what your body needed in that moment, right, to release. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but I can see how that would be like frightening, or maybe strange, right, to another person who isn't used to somebody being so open or so honest about how they're feeling and what their needs are. So like you said, like one, being honest with ourselves, right, about what it is that we need and what it is that we're feeling, but also like having partners that really listen to us and honor what it is that we're saying that we want and that we need. Yeah. So if y'all are watching this and you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave these in the chat box. We're pre-recording this, so we're not seeing your comments and your questions immediately, but we will get to them. So please leave your comments there. I'm sure that if y'all are listening to this conversation, your brain is like going in a million different directions like mine. It's so much awesome information. So please do leave those comments below, and we will get back to them at a future date. So Bianca, we've been talking about, right, like a little bit of everything in terms of like pleasure, right? You seem to be very attuned with what your needs are and communicating those to your lovers, right? But I think that getting to that place is so difficult for a lot of us because there are so many expectations, right? So what is your advice, or like how did you get to the point where you were, one, like honest with yourself about what your needs are, right? And then comfortable enough to really like convey that to a partner. Like what was that journey like for you? Do you have any advice for folks?
Yeah, it's a constant journey. And, even though I'm now in a relationship with a core partner, one of the things that I did when my mom died was I realized a year later, I was like, I can't get out of bed. I might need some medication. And so I went to a psychiatrist. I got on some antidepressants. And, I want to say that out loud because I know that a lot of people who are sick or disabled or identify as mad, we often stigmatize that. And I just want to let people know that you can take whatever you need to take care of yourself and to show up and to get in the shower and to eat some food. And that's what I needed, was a pill to help me do that. And, I'm slowly getting off that medication, and it has been about 3 years. And, it's not going to be my whole life. And for some people it is. So that's the first thing, was I needed to be honest with what the fuck is going on in my body. What is happening? Why am I, yes, I'm grieving and I'm mourning, but I also had to be open to a variety of different interventions that could help me be my full self. And so for me, that looked like I needed to talk to a psychiatrist. And as much as I never wanted to be on any kind of medication in that way, I couldn't function. I wasn't feeding myself. I wasn't brushing my teeth. Like, it really became a larger issue where I was like, this is not the life that I can live right now, and I need to take care of myself. So it's also acknowledging that I deserve care, that I'm worthy of attention, that I deserve to experience a good experience with a psychologist, and in this case, a psychiatrist. And what I chose to do was see a psychologist and a psychiatrist at the same time. And I've been seeing the same psychologist since then in New Orleans. We still work together. And so for me, I just want to say up front that, like, I do a lot of therapy and I take medication. And that was one of my first steps to doing that. And it was really important, and it was really hard. And what that looks like today for me, doing all that work, and living in my principles and in my values, and now being a compromised immune person in a relationship during COVID, like, my libido is gone 95% of the time. I'm just like, oh, you thinking about sex? I'm thinking about how I don't want to die. My partner and I have really different needs right now that are sexual needs. And for me, I'm like, this is exactly why we're polyamorous. But also, it's hard to be polyamorous during a pandemic where other people are not being safe. They're not masking. They're not getting tested. And that puts me in a really bad situation. And so it's intense conversations with my partner. And, just thinking about it makes my palms sweat. So I just want to acknowledge that, like, it can get easier, but it's always going to be a challenge to really be honest and really take a look at yourself. And what I had to do was decide who in my circle is really showing up for me and who can I pull in closer and who do I need to let go because they're taking up too much space and they're not reciprocating and they're not caring for me. And it was a devastating time. I had to end certain friendships. I had to tell people I need some time away from our friendship while I figure out and take care of myself. And also it was a really beautiful experience where, yes, I'm devastated for losing some friendships, but also I created so much space for really beautiful friendships, for people who I never thought would show up for me, to come closer in and say, Bianca, we love you. We've always loved you. I was just on that second tier of people who love you. Now you brought me in a little bit closer and I could show up for you. And so it really was this practice of this ebb and flow. And that was part of my connection to like the ocean. I was like, the ocean is always my safe place when I think about like, where do I need to feel safe? Where I'm like, when I'm at the ocean, the ocean has been probably my first lover, who is always like, come here, I will hold you. I don't care how big or fat or small or large. Like, I will make you feel weightless, And so as my lover, never rejecting me, but also being like, don't come in here if you ain't ready. Don't come in here if you're not ready to fully be embraced and maybe even moved a little bit further than what you're comfortable with. Just come in. And so it was this really beautiful connection to being like, okay, what am I ready for? Because it's going to show up in a really intentional way. So what that looks like for me is I talk a lot with my partner. There's times where we had to negotiate and plan sex, and I share that because when you start working, if you're someone who has kids, we don't have children, but we have full lives and we do work. And for some people, they think sex should be spontaneous, and that's great. And what it really looks like, though, in action is like sometimes you got to schedule that stuff. and it's okay to be like, yo, we're going to fuck, Tuesday night at 8. And so everything else needs to be done because we're just going to be together and stay in bed and that's going to be our night. And it was really fun to be able to look forward to something. It was really great to talk about like, ooh, do you want me to wear anything specific? Like it felt good to prepare. And that's really what we do in general, right? Like, I know for me, there was a moment where like, I was like, ooh, I want to have, my legs shaved because I like the way that feels, that sensation of someone touching me and I have shaved legs. I haven't shaved my legs in like a couple of months. And so now I'm like, ooh, I like it when, I have my knee-high socks on and my partner can roll down my socks and my little pelitos, my little hairs are all like, ooh. So it's different sensations, right? And so it was also about building intimacy. And I think a lot of the times people talk about sex and fucking and they just want to talk about genitals. But what's it look like for my partner and I is that we snuggle a lot. We do a lot of face caressing, we do a lot of body massages. We do a lot of like nibbling or biting or sucking on each other's body parts, so my partner loves like just biting me all over. So it's not always just like in erogenous zones. Like my partner will like bite on my wrist and I'm like, really?
I love that.
It's cute little nibbles. And so it's that kind of intimacy that we've cultivated where, we don't even need to say anything to each other. But if I start caressing my partner in a particular way, he knows, oh, Bianca needs a hug, or oh, Bianca's hungry, or oh, Bianca wants me to come a little bit closer, or oh, Bianca wants me to run the bathwater, right? So we've been able to communicate non-verbally in a way that I think is exactly what happens when people age together and grow old together and build that intimacy that really looks like what happens with changing bodies. And so my libido is constantly shifting, and it definitely is because of the pandemic. And it's also definitely because of this medication. So I just want to validate anybody who is on antidepressants and feels like their libido has shifted. It may be your antidepressants, and you can totally talk to a psychiatrist and consider Wellbutrin. That's the one medication that we know doesn't have side effects that impact your libido. but also lower doses can also help. So it's that part, but it's also, just being honest. And it was really hard to tell my partner, who I love and adore and I'm deeply attracted to, that like, yeah, we can have sex, but do you want me to perform interest, or are you like, I could just lay there, I want to take care of you? How do we need to negotiate this? And there were also times where I was like, I'm just not feeling like I want to do anything or have anything on my body, but I can fist you. I got some lube and some gloves. Are you down for that? And so it's really about negotiation, because sometimes my partner is like, I miss the smell of, your vulva and I want my face in it. Great. And I just went to the GYN and I really can't have anything, happening down there just for like another 24 hours. So we negotiate, and he's like, well, how about I bathe you? How about, I give you a little toilet? How about I just use this toy on the outside of your vulva? So there's ways to do it, and it's really about being creative. And so I really would encourage people to step into that creativity and to acknowledge that, like, if your body's feeling pain, remind yourself that your body can also feel pleasure. And sometimes that pleasure is not about your genitals. And I think for a lot of disabled people, that is what we need to be reminded of, is that a lot of the information about sexuality is about genitals, and not all of us have those same relationships with our genitals. And it's okay to experience other types of non-genital orgasm and other types of intimacy that really feels fulfilling and beautiful, because that's also what life is about. We can't constantly be fucking all the time the ways that we want. As Goody shared, a couple of weeks ago, she was like, a quickie is really sometimes what people just need. And like that can look a variety of different ways for people. And so for me, it's really about reminding people that pleasure doesn't look just one way, that pleasure is constantly shifting and changing. And to really be connected to it requires you to be honest about what pleases you. And so sometimes my partner's like, I don't need to do anything but spank your ass. So it's not even like us taking off clothes, right? It's not even like, there can still be power exchange and playfulness. And that to me is still really beautiful and human. It's such a human experience and connection.
Yeah, I think that the way that you describe your intimate relationship with your partner is really rooted, right, in your work in disability justice, because the way that your sexuality kind of expresses itself and you express it with your partner is not like necessarily just penetrative sexual organs, like the kind of sex that we're taught is sex, right? Like and I think it's beautiful how you say it's kind of like the way that folks age together and the way that intimacy looks when you age, and maybe your body isn't doing the things that you were doing, when you were younger, but it's still like a beautiful connection that is fulfilling and is sexually stimulating and is intimate. And it's just such a beautiful way to look at sex and sensuality. Do you have so what does, in regards to like everything you've been talking about, right? I feel like being free in your body is something that is coming up, right? Because the honesty, the communication with a partner is about really like body liberation, like being liberated in your own body. How do you think that as fat women of color, right, where a lot of us do carry a lot of trauma in our bodies, how can we work toward like body liberation? Do you think it's about that, like communication with ourselves, loving ourselves, or how does that look? How does that look for you? And what advice would you have for folks watching?
Yeah, I would first say that trauma is such a human experience, and it doesn't always need to be pathologized. And so I say that for people who may think, oh, I have to go to this Western trained therapist. Yeah, that works for some people, and it doesn't work for others, and that's okay. There are other ways to heal. And I think for a lot of us, collective healing is also really important to, survive and cope with a lot of the trauma that we might hold. And so what that might look like is, for me, I have like a monthly meeting with Black sex educators where we just sit and chill and we rage, we grieve, whatever we need to at that time. And so I think those are really important components for me as well, to stay connected, and to really show up and be taken care of in the way that I want to be. Technology has really shifted as well. I think me being able to connect with other fat people. The reality is that I know what it feels like to be a fat person and not leave your house, because you got to deal with people who want to have opinions about your body and how you're moving. And I'm one of those, again, when I leave the house, I'm like 6'3". I don't wear baggy clothes like I used to in the 90s, because I'm like, I want to show my body. And so I do have a different aesthetic that is deeply femme. I don't know that people identify me as a high femme. Maybe they would, but whatever. I don't really get into those details. But I'm now a femme in sneakers, right? Like, I wear sneakers all the time. I don't wear anything with a heel anymore that's connected to my disability. Like, I have another, physical disability. And so, what does it look like for me leaving the home in a particular way and connecting with people? And I know what that feels like. I know how isolating it can be. And so the internet and online spaces have really been a beautiful way for me to connect with other fat people, especially fat women of color. And then thinking about what it looks like and what it means to be able to stay connected in this way, and also just do such heavy, intense work is really it's really like at the core of like who I am. Like I've said, I've been fat my whole life, so this is not a new experience. But also a lot of the unlearning that I had to do as a fat person was get out of this idea that my body is the problem. My body is not the problem. My fatness is not the problem. The fact that I have a 36-inch inseam is not the problem. It's that this chair has arms. That's the problem. You know what I mean? Like, it's that this chair isn't wide enough. That's the problem. Like, it took me buying a tricycle in New Orleans, where I went to like a bike shop and I was like, hey, I want to buy this tricycle and have it shipped here. Will you put it together? And they were like, sure. And I was like, will it hold my weight? And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, is this good for me as a fat, tall person? And they were like, miss, you're not that big. And I was like, don't try to like assuage my whatever. There's always people who are like, don't say that about yourself. Fat's not bad. That is an attitude, whatever. But this dude was straight. He was like, listen, miss, you're not as big as you think you are. We have men who are twice your size who can ride that tricycle. And I'm like, whatever. I've never seen it happen. But, I then talked to another homegirl of mine that same day, and she was like, Bianca, it's true. Like, there are men bigger than you that don't have any issue, and they don't question in the same way that you're questioning whether or not your body will fit this particular machine that's made for bodies like yours, right? So it was in that instant where I was like, what the fuck else do I blame on being fat? Because that's how I've been socialized, is that my fat is the problem, that my body's been the problem. And it's been disability justice and being a student of disability justice, and also building a mentorship and a homegirlship with some of the Black women, the queer and non-binary Black women, who helped create that framework, and learning from them and listening to them. And, it just opens up a new area for me to really acknowledge, wow, I've been fucked up by the way that we've been socialized and the way that I've told my body is unworthy. And now here I am in this amazing crip community where people are like, your body's so perfect and valuable and you're so worthy. And that's what collective access and liberation looks like. That's where we're doing it together. And so it really became an opportunity for me to recognize that like fat liberation, body liberation is deeply in alignment with disability justice. Like there's no way to separate. There's no justice without disability justice. There's no liberation without body liberation. And so it really required me to take a look at how I was really framing liberation and still blaming my body in a very capitalist way, where I was like, oh, my body can't do that. I must not be worthy of making a good pay or thriving wage, right? Like, that's the
system. That's their problem.
Exactly. And so now I'm like, oh yeah, that's not the issue, right? And it, like, once I literally was able to be like, my body's not the problem, I was able to literally turn around and be like, oh shit, look at all these different, opportunities that are available. Look at all of these resources. I don't know about anybody else, but one of the things that's really changed my life this year is that I got a stool, a shower chair that goes into my shower. Because look, this hair, it takes a minute. You know, Sundays are the days of international people of color washing their hair. And, like, it takes a minute, you know, and like I gotta detangle and blah blah. And also, look, sometimes my body aches and I still need to take a shower. And so having a shower chair that holds, you know, 600 pounds, that should exist, you know, and like being able, like, it just never occurred to me that that's what was possible. And so I really, you know, at 40 years of age, I started to really start unlearning some of that bullshit. And, you know, I probably am a late bloomer in comparison to like the 20 somethings who I'm being mentored by, who have been disabled, born disabled, who are fat. You know, they're teaching me also, like, Bianca, here's how I wear my clothes as a wheelchair user. And here's the ways that I have to, you know, mend my gear. And, you know, that to me is like, that's fucking crit brilliance. So, you know, and those are the things, like, I know what it felt like to make my own clothes, because that's what I had to do, because I didn't have money, and I grew out of my clothes, or the thighs would rub together in my pants, and I had to make a skirt, like whatever it looked like. And here I was like, oh wow, it never occurred to me that like I could do X, Y, or Z, and that would have changed my life 20 years ago when I was making my own clothes. So for me, it was really about unlearning and also building intentional community. And also being humble and saying, there are 20 somethings that can teach me something, you know, and there are, you know, elders that can still teach me something. I don't know everything. And that was really important. I mean, it still is really important for me to acknowledge I'm not the expert at anything but my own body. And even that I had to relearn. And so, you know, for me, what it's really been like these past couple of years has been this negotiation with my body and mind. And, you know, my body mind's changing. And that's part of the conversation. You know, as people, you know, socialized as female, we're told about puberty and we're told about, you know, menopause, but we're not told about the shit that happens in between there. And so I'm in this situation where I'm like, oh, I got other stuff going on in between that, and I'm relearning this. And also I have a lot of homegirls and homies who are going through perimenopause and menopause. You know, Bianca, there's nothing about this for queer people. There's nothing about this for intersex and non-binary people. Where do I find information? You know, and so now I'm seeing where there needs to be more information that is targeted at communities that do not have the vulvas, or, you know, who still have their entire reproductive system intact. Like, some of us have been really traumatized by like endometriosis or a hysterectomy or a really hard pregnancy or whatever it is. And we're not really creating a space to have those conversations. So for me, it really started with unlearning that's the way I was trained to think about my body. And then it was just like opening up. It's like seeing the white light, you know, and being like, oh, there's other ways. And that's been a really liberatory experience for me as a fat person, as a person of color, as a disabled person, as a queer person. And it's really like changed my sex life too. It's been such a joy. You know, my partner who's not disabled is like, I love that fucking shower chair. Like, I can just sit there and I can reach my feet better. Like, it's changed all of our lives. You know? It's not just about accessibility. It's about everyone getting a joyful bath when they need it. So yeah.
And that's such a simple, right? Like seemingly simple, like adjustment. But like you said, it's like unlearning and realizing that it's not, that our bodies are not the problem. It's just that there are these obstacles and these norms that make us believe that our bodies are the problem, when in reality it's not, you know? So that's such an empowering way to like look at our own lives and our bodies. Like, we need to unlearn, right? We need to build community and learn collectively, be humbled, learn from other people. You never know who's going to teach you the thing that you need to know. You don't know who holds that information. So listen, guys, listen.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So this hour has flown by, and it's been such a joy to have you. Is there anything anything you want to share, anything coming up, ways that we can support you, connect with you from here on out?
Yeah, absolutely. I love shameless plugs, so thank you for offering that. I am accessible on purpose. So if you Google my name, if you go to my website, like, You will find my email address. You will find me on Twitter and Instagram. And you are welcome to send me a note. You are welcome to send me an email. I want to be accessible to people, especially fat people of color, especially disabled people. So please find me. I'm happy to make connections in the ways that I can. And, if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the classes that I'm teaching, you can definitely find them at biancalaureano.com. You can also find them on Instagram, where I'm advertising them because it's one of my bigger market areas. And I'm Latinegra Sexologist on Instagram. And I have some really great trainings coming up. The first one in November is a fat sex SAR, and that's with Sonali Ratheshwar, who is known as the fat sex therapist. So we're collaborating to offer people in the sexuality field, or people who are interested in understanding fat people's experiences with sex and sexuality. We're offering a 2-day workshop. So you can find out more about that on Instagram and also on my websites. And then I have another more traditional sexuality workshop coming up in December with my good friend Lynn St. Dre, who is a sex therapist and a Mexican-American woman and parent and queerdo and artist. And we're going to do a 3-day workshop for sexuality professionals, challenging us to really think about, like, what are our values and how are they showing up? What are some of our biases, and how can we begin to incorporate referrals that are powerful and reduce the harm for our clients? So I welcome you to reach out to me. It's been such an amazing pleasure to be here with you, Yesenia. And thank you, Ivy, for reaching out to us and reaching out to me and putting us in conversation. It's been a really great time.
This was incredible. I'm gonna have to rewatch the live and take notes, because I was in it and I was listening, but there's so much that you kind of deconstructed and shared that I really want to take that in. So I appreciate your candor, your voice, your who you are, and how you show up in the world. It's such a beautiful thing to witness, and it was a pleasure to chat with you. For everyone watching this live, this can be viewed on the Fat Women of Color YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this chat and are a fat woman of color, we invite you to join us in our private online community at collective.fatwomenofcolor.com. It is a membership space that is exclusively for fat women of color. We chat about anything and everything. We have themes every month. This month was the power of pleasure, but anything is open for discussion, right? Because we really do need those spaces to build community and to learn from each other. Like Dr. Bianca Laureano pointed out to us and reminded us. So thank you so much, Bianca, for being here. And we hope that y'all enjoyed this chat. If you have any questions for Bianca, hit her up. Support her work, refer her to people if you know somebody who needs to hear what she has to offer, and reach out directly. And thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Bianca. I am honored to have chatted with you today and to know you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.